Jumatatu mpaka Ijumaa moja kwa moja kutoka
Hello, I'm Esther Gidhu-Ewart. It's Tuesday, October 11th. This is Africa 54.
Lesotho's newly formed party Revolution for Prosperity forms a coalition government after falling short of an overall majority in recent elections. South African families endure life in the dark as an electricity crisis remains unresolved despite years of government promises. And Africa bears the greatest rate of suicide cases globally. Now the World Health Organization has launched a suicide prevention campaign.
We begin our broadcast in Southern Africa, where a diamond magnate who scored a stunning breakthrough in Lesotho's nationwide elections last week announced on Tuesday that he will head a three-party coalition government. David Doyle has more.
It was only formed earlier this year, but the Revolution for Prosperity has emerged as Lesotho's biggest single party following an election last week. That announcement was made by the Southern African Kingdom's Election Commission on Monday. However, it also said that the party, created by diamond magnate Sam Matekane in March, has fallen short of a clear majority. With 56 seats, RFP will now have to court other parties to pave the way for a change of government in Lesotho's 120-seat parliament. Lesotho, a landlocked enclave within South Africa, has been marred by years of political instability under the current governing party, the All Basotho Convention. Friday's election went ahead despite a deadlock in Parliament on a range of constitutional reforms aimed at bringing order to Lesotho's fractious politics, and which were meant to be enacted before the vote.
David Doyle of Reuters filed that report. As South Africa's energy crisis rages, its effects are huge on households. The nation's unemployment rate has soared to over 34%, and the cost of living continues to rise. The power cuts have brought untold suffering to lower middle-class families as they can barely afford alternative sources of energy. Tuso Kumalo reports from Johannesburg.
Buti Mashiko is one of the people considered to be living a decent life in the densely populated suburb of Soweto in Johannesburg. But the constant power cuts being experienced across the country have extremely frustrated this respected construction entrepreneur and his family. The family has to endure 9 hours without electricity daily.
This is very serious because right now we are sitting in the dark. I can't watch the TV, I can't watch the news, I don't know what's going on in the country now.
The meal times have been the worst affected for this family of 8. Sometimes power goes off in the middle of cooking. Eating cold food has become the new normal for this family. On a daily basis, this family has to throw away refrigerated food that has gone bad. This has increased their financial burden.
If there are any leftovers, we have to eat them cold, early in the morning, since the fridge is also affected. We do that to avoid throwing food away, because food is now very expensive.
Kiabezwe Mashiho is Buti's oldest daughter. She is preparing for her final high school exams due next month, but the power cuts are now a stumbling block.
It does affect my studies because the results of the challenges that I'm facing might lead to me failing.
The youngsters in this home also have to miss out watching their favorite cartoons. The Kengli has become their source of light as they play their evening games just before going to bed. This dark experience across the country has forced some families to turn to solar energy to escape the darkness and cold baths.
Sometimes there will be guys jumping in, trying to enter into your premises, and you can't see them. They're not visible. So we install a few solar lights.
And experts say the future is even darker unless something is done fast.
Failure or refusal by the government and the newly appointed board to remove Andre de Ruyter as the CEO and Caleb Kasim as the CFO will plunge this country into a total blackout, which will be the collapse of the transmission grid within the next 3 months. That is what South Africa is facing.
The country's power utility Eskom spokesperson Sekonati Manchanja, who refused to speak on camera, told VOA that the power cuts have been as a result of South Africa's failure to build new power stations while neglecting the maintenance of existing ones. The government has failed to find solutions. President Cyril Ramaphosa, who was on a trip abroad a few weeks ago, had to urgently return home to deal with the crisis. However, nothing has changed so far. This means South Africa's road to a dark future is still long and winding. Tuso Kumalo for VOA News, Johannesburg.
And we have more on the power outage in South Africa.
It's an issue that is close to our hearts, as business people also, with small businesses trying to make a living. As you know, our economy, I think it's out in the public if you look at the numbers. Our economy is not doing exceptionally well. And also if you look at South Africa, there's a need to bring online more what we call black-owned small businesses, right? So that we can have the right mix in the economy and give people opportunities. And the power situation doesn't help. Someone who owns a bakery, someone who owns a butchery, someone who owns something like a laundry, shop, is really in trouble because that person cannot afford an alternative source, of energy. As you can imagine, the power, the diesel, petrol and diesel costs are quite high. But also someone like that wouldn't be able to just go and buy a generator, right? So it's a bit of a problem because, a lot of people are then going to lose jobs as a result of it. We've had load shedding, but not to the extent that we're having it now. It seems to have escalated. But if you look at the country, there were interventions done by the previous presidents who ran the country. The current president as well was a deputy president then, was involved in what we call the war rooms to try and address the situation. It's really a maintenance issue. Our infrastructure is aging. It has not been maintained well.
From a user's point of view, like for your case, you run a small business, you have people who run small businesses, you have families that depend on this power. What do you do in this case if the bodies that are supposed to provide that service can't do it? Do you have alternative sources of energy?
A lot of businesses don't, right? That's a clear answer. And that's where the problem starts. I was talking to someone who runs a butcher, and his meat got rotten because his fridges are powered through this electricity. And this got no alternative means, right? Of course, you do get other businesses that are able to make a plan. If someone has been in business for a while and they've done well, they may be able to purchase a generator. But what we're seeing as well is that big business. We've seen a few companies mentioned where they are starting to now invest in their own solar power, right? Infrastructure. We'll rely on coal for quite a while. We'll rely on nuclear for quite a while. It's not going to disappear in the next few years. So the IPP plan and the renewable energy plan is a long-term plan. So what that basically means is until we resolve the operational challenges that we're talking about, then we have a problem, because bringing in renewable energy without addressing those issues still doesn't output enough, for us, to have, this problem go away.
How does Eskom justify these kinds of crises? Because this is like the third year in a row where you guys have had some serious challenges with power.
From my perspective, I think it's been excuse after excuse, to be honest. There's been a mentioning of, political interference. And then there's been talk that some of the skills that have come in are either not competent enough or not committed enough to do the job that they're doing. But also there's been this problem that I'm mentioning, that of poor workmanship. From where we stand as normal citizens, we think that there's also a big problem of competence, either at the board level and executive management level.
Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Paul.
VOA's Paul Ndiho speaking to Johannesburg-based Kaliza Vusa. The United Nations Development Programme says 54 countries with nearly half in sub-Saharan Africa need immediate debt relief to avoid more extreme poverty. Heidi Adams has the details.
The United Nations Development Programme warned on Tuesday that a serious debt crisis is now taking hold in poorer parts of the world. In a report, the UNDP estimated that 54 countries, with nearly half in sub-Saharan Africa, need immediate debt relief to avoid even more extreme poverty and give them a chance of dealing with climate change. The countries account for more than half of the world's poorest people. According to the report, a serious debt crisis is unfolding and the likelihood of a worsening outlook is high. The warning comes as the International Monetary Fund and World Bank hold meetings in Washington this week. That's amid rising global recession worries and a crop of debt crises in countries ranging from Sri Lanka and Pakistan to Chad, Ethiopia and Zambia. The UNDP's administrator, Akim Steiner, urged a string of measures. They include writing off debt and offering wider relief to a greater number of countries. The report also called for a recalibration of the G20-led common framework. It's the plan designed to help countries pushed into financial trouble by the global health crises restructure their debt. Only Chad, Ethiopia and Zambia have used it so far. The UNDP's proposals include expanding the common framework's eligibility to include all heavily indebted countries and for any debt payments to be automatically suspended during the process. Heidi Adams, VOA News.
The trial of Kunti Kamara, a former Liberian rebel, is underway in Paris. He is charged with crimes against humanity, torture and acts of barbarism during the West African country's civil war in the 1990s. The allegations before the Paris Criminal Court against Kamara, 47, date back to 1993 and 1994, early years in the back-to-back conflicts that would ultimately kill 250,000 people between 1989 and 2003. The conflicts were marked by mass murders, rape and mutilations, in many cases by child soldiers conscripted by warlords. Atrocities against civilians were common, with drugged fighters chopping off people's limbs, and the trial by the Paris Criminal Court is possible under a French law that recognizes universal jurisdiction for crimes against humanity and acts of torture. Ethiopia's President Saleh Work Zewde says her government is working hard to deal with inflation that is overburdening Ethiopians. She made the comments during the opening of Parliament, which was also addressed by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. The two officials also commented on the ongoing conflict with Tigrayan rebels, saying the government is looking to find a peaceful resolution to the war with the Tigray People's Liberation Front. For more on the conflict, I'm joined live via Skype by Milkesa Gemechu, an assistant professor of political science at Albion College in Michigan. Professor Gemechu, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you.
You know, the Tigray conflict has dominated headlines in Ethiopia since 2020. It's ongoing. We still don't know when the resumption of the postponed peace talks are going to happen. But we watched the president and the prime minister speak. So given what you know, what concerns you most about this political conflict in your native country?
So thank you very much. I have concern regarding to the peace talk that started in South Africa because number one, the ground authorities have been repeatedly having concern regarding to the former president of Nigeria, Mr. Obasanjo, but the neutrality issue is very important in mediation. At the same time, Mr. Uhuru last time said he didn't know the place where and the time of scheduling, and it tells a lot about the peace process. Therefore, on the other hand, the issue of Eritrean forces occupying territories in the Horn of Africa, I mean, I have a big concern about that. And the president's statement is the obvious statement. However, I don't think it is going to happen. It is going to, because number one, Ethiopia does not command its own military forces in the northern part of Ethiopia. A large part of the Grand territory is in the hand of Eritrean forces. So I don't think Ethiopia is fully sovereign at this time. So,
Professor, but Ethiopia, Eritrea's troops are there on the invitation of Prime Minister Abiy. So I don't know how that conflict is. However, you mentioned Obasanjo. The African Union has been involved in this. The United States has called for peace in Ethiopia. What do you expect to see then from international communities such as AU, the US, and other parties that are asking for an end to this conflict?
Yeah, I do believe that particularly international community, particularly United States, has undermined its sheer power of peace building in the Horn of Africa for unknown reason. I don't know the reason, but it has the power to end all type of hostilities that is happening in the Horn of Africa. Because in the first place, international community has missed where the conflict started. The conflict started somewhere else, not in the north. It started in Oromia, and therefore we should have paid full attention, comprehensive attention to treat the problem. But I don't think still United States needs to reconsider its approach to sub-Saharan Africa.
Right.
That is going back to this core principle of promoting peace building and democracy.
Right, Professor. We have to leave it there. Hopefully, the president's words that they will end this conflict in 2.5 months will stand. Professor Gemechu.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Milkesa Gemechu is an assistant professor of political science at Albion College in Michigan. Still to come, the latest on Botswana's critically endangered vultures. But first, Haiti Adams tells us what's coming up on Wednesday's Straight Talk Africa.
A one-on-one interview with former Ghanaian President John Mahama, who says the United States should create a Marshall Plan for Africa. We'll also discuss why it appears that democracy is struggling to take hold in parts of the continent, particularly parts of West Africa, where a new crop of leaders is coming to power through coups and military takeovers. Join me, Haiti Adams, on the next Straight Talk Africa.
In other news, the CEO of Qatar Energy and Qatar's Minister of Energy, Saad Al-Kaabi, says the state-owned petroleum company is investigating how to speed up the development of 2 oil wells recently discovered off the Namibian coast. The Burundian government is banning contraceptive methods for teenagers and unmarried young girls. The Burundi health minister made the announcement Tuesday during a symposium of women leaders in Bujumbura. And the prime ministers of Algeria and France hail a new dynamic at the Joint Economic Forum in Algiers. For more on this story, be sure to visit voaafrica.com. Botswana is facing a rise in the poisoning of critically endangered vulture species. In August, 50 white-backed vultures were found dead after feeding on a buffalo carcass in a national park. Mkondisi Dube reports from Gaborone, Botswana. VOA's Vincent Makori narrates.
In the past few decades, vulture numbers in Botswana and South Africa have been falling due in part to accidental poisoning by farmers who were managing their fields with poisonous agrochemicals. But more recently, authorities in Botswana say vultures are being deliberately killed because as carrion eaters, they fly over carcasses which can lead rangers to poachers. Also, the bird's body parts are being used in traditional medicine, primarily in West Africa and Asia. Recent poisonings in South Africa and Botswana resulted in the deaths of over 150 endangered white-backed vultures. In both instances, the birds' body parts were removed. BirdLife Botswana CEO Mosheringanya Kotsitse says it is the first incident of its kind reported in the country.
For Botswana, this is the first time we received a record where body parts have been harvested. Not to say they couldn't have been before, but we haven't received any reports. It's an eye-opener for us because we are now thinking maybe this has been happening and not have been reported.
On September 3rd, International Vulture Awareness Day, which was celebrated in Botswana on September 17, the message was, save the vulture, stop the misuse of agrochemicals to poison vultures. Kusitse says more must be done to educate people about the importance of vultures and is calling for the creation of a public awareness campaign. Conservationist Neil Fitt also says public education is key.
The only way to tackle it, in my opinion, is education. And at the minute, BirdLife Botswana, and I know lots of others, and Cheetah Conservation Botswana, and one or two others, are doing a really great job at children education. But they're not the people out in the bush and at the cattle posts all the time these days.
In 2019, more than 500 white-backed vultures were deliberately poisoned in Botswana, and more than 2,000 have been killed by poachers and the use of agrochemicals over the past decade. Wildlife and National Parks Director Kabelo Senyatso says his department is worried about the decline in vulture numbers.
So we are developing a vulture action plan that will bring all the pieces together. But even before getting to that particular document, strategic planning document, the department has been doing some interventions, including working with the Ministry of Agriculture in encouraging them to move away from particular agrochemicals that we found to be toxic to wildlife.
The white-backed vulture is on the International Union of Conservation of Nature's red list of critically endangered bird species. Though it is difficult to get exact numbers, wildlife experts are reporting significant declines in local populations across Africa. From Kondi Sidube in Gaborone, Botswana, I'm Vincent Makori, VOA News, Washington.
It's time for Health Report, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Lino Mudu with the latest on mental health and suicide. Hello, Lino.
Hello, Esther. The world commemorated Global Mental Health Day on Monday to draw attention to mental health and raise support for patients. The United Nations says Africa needs to combat a suicide rate that is the highest in the world, yet remains widely unrecognized and often stigmatized. 6 of the 10 countries with the greatest suicide rates in the world are in Africa, and around 11 people per 100,000 per year die by suicide across Africa. That's higher than the global average of 9 per 100,000 people, according to the World Health Organization. The WHO has launched a suicide prevention campaign in Africa to raise awareness and mobilize the support of governments and decision makers for more attention and funding towards programs dedicated to mental health. For more insight on mental health and suicide in Africa, psychiatrist Alfred Ngirababyeye joins me live via Skype from Geneva, Switzerland. Hello and welcome to Africa, Dr. Alfred.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. So according to the WHO, Africa has the highest rate of suicide in the world, which is really mind-boggling. And young people seem to be affected the most. What is fueling this crisis?
I think this is a very complex question, but to make it simple, I think that like it is in other low and middle-income countries, the governments tend to spend the scarce resources on the care which is based around the psychiatric hospitals. And also these hospitals are in the big cities. So this made that there is a lack of mental health services or a lack of access to mental health care to the majority of the people in need of mental health care.
So is the access to mental services the main answer? What can be done to help people who have suicidal thoughts and lower the incidence of suicide on the continent? Where does the process start?
I think the first thing to do is to make the policy plans and programs to early identify the people who have suicidal thoughts or suicidal behaviors, to assess them properly, to assess the dangerosity, to assess the emergency or the risk to commit suicide, and then manage them accordingly. And in what I think could be the community-based services, community-based mental health follow-up services, so that anyone who is affected by suicidal behaviors can have the access to care in his community and with the community he live in.
Okay. So suicide is just one symptom of mental illness. There are many other issues. What can people do every day to care about their mental health?
I think there are a lot of things to do, a lot of interventions to care, to promote mental health of the people of any community. The intervention that can be related to the childhood, the support for children, program that can target vulnerable groups like minorities, like immigrants or people affected with conflict, substance abuse and alcohol management, the violence prevention programs or community development programs. There are complex interventions that can be put together to promote the mental health of every individual. As I believe, as my colleagues, that we cannot talk about health without mental health.
Okay, Dr. Alfred, we have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Not at all. Thank you.
And that was Dr. Alfred Ingirababiye, a Geneva, Switzerland-based psychiatrist. And that's our health report for today. To stay in touch, find me on Twitter at Lenore Moudou. Back to you, Esther.
Thank you, Lenore. Be sure to watch Lenore Moudou's health reports every Tuesday right here on Africa 54. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thanks for watching.